Her hand trembled only slightly when she poured the wine. But I caught it. I caught everything. The faint clink of glass against the neck of the bottle, the unnatural pause as she hovered over my glass, and then that quick, practiced flick of her wrist. Too quick for most eyes. Not mine. I didn't say a word. I didn't even blink. Instead, I leaned forward, pretending to fuss with the napkin that had slipped from my lap. My fingers brushed the stem of my glass, and in one smooth motion, I swapped it with hers. The move was so ordinary, so unremarkable, that she didn't notice a thing. When she returned to her seat, she smiled, tight, deliberate, like someone hiding something behind perfect teeth. She raised her glass. "To family," she said. The words came out a little too sweet, almost sticky. I lifted mine in return, my eyes never leaving hers. And then she drank. A slow swallow, her throat working harder than usual, the tiniest hesitation before she forced the rest down. That was the moment. That hesitation. I knew then, without question, that Melanie, my daughter-in-law, the woman my son had chosen and trusted, wanted me gone. I set my glass back down gently, the way a man does when he's had enough for the evening. I didn't taste it. I didn't need to. I'd already tasted betrayal in my own home, and it was sharper than any poison. The roast chicken sat untouched on my plate. The rosemary potatoes had gone cold. I sat there across from her, smiling faintly, asking polite questions about the children's school, her new yoga class, the trivial things she always spoke of. She answered with the same fake warmth, not realizing that every word only confirmed what I already knew. And when Daniel came downstairs, cheerful and unsuspecting, he looked at me the way sons look at fathers who they believe are safe and unshakable. I smiled back at him, steady as stone, even while Melanie sat inches away, hiding murder behind her glass of wine. That was the night everything changed. Because once a man knows he's been marked for death by his own family, he stops being a victim and starts preparing for the reckoning. Daniel kissed Melanie on the cheek as he sat down, not seeing the stiffness in her smile. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from carrying too much weight at work and at home. He trusted her completely. Too much. That blind trust was the very shield she hid behind. "Dad," he said, cutting into the chicken, "I'm glad you could come tonight. The kids love when you visit. Makes the house feel full." His eyes softened in a way that reminded me of when he was a boy, running barefoot through the yard, calling for me to watch him climb the oak tree. I nodded, chewing slowly though the food tasted like nothing. "Always happy to see them," I said, my gaze flicking to Melanie. "And you." Her fork froze for half a second, then carried on. She smiled politely, but her eyes didn't smile. That was when I realized something important. She thought I hadn't noticed. She believed her little trick had slipped past me. That gave me time. I let the conversation flow as if nothing had happened. I asked about Daniel's work, listened to him complain about deadlines, nodded in the right places. But the whole time I was watching her. Watching the way she dabbed her lips with her napkin more often than necessary. The way she kept glancing at me, like she was waiting. Waiting for what? For me to weaken? For the first signs of dizziness, nausea, confusion? She wanted to inherit my silence, not my words. My house, not my presence. My money, not my company. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. When dessert came, her homemade apple pie, I declined politely. "I'll save my sweet tooth for another day," I said. She pressed a little, too eager, but I stood firm. Daniel didn't notice. He never noticed the small things. I drove home that night with my hands tight on the wheel, my pulse steady. The road stretched out dark and empty, but my head was crowded with thoughts. The betrayal was one thing. The arrogance was another. She thought she could erase me quietly, without mess, without questions. But the thing about poison is, it never works out the way the one who pours it expects. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I'd already decided. I wasn't going to the police. Not yet. No, this wasn't a matter for courts and lawyers. This was family. And family matters are settled differently. I play her game. I'd let her think she still held the upper hand. And then, when the moment was right, I'd turn the trap back on her. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Habit, maybe. Or maybe it was the weight of knowing someone under my roof. Someone who sat at my table, wanted me dead. Sunlight crept through the blinds, cutting across the floor, and I just sat there at the edge of the bed, staring at the carpet, replaying her every movement from the night before. I brewed coffee, black and strong, the way I'd always had it. My hands didn't shake. That was the most important thing. She was waiting for me to show weakness, and I would give her nothing. By noon, Daniel called. "Dad, thanks for last night. Melanie said you seemed quieter than usual. Everything okay?" His voice was full of worry, but not suspicion. "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired. Getting old, you know." I forced a chuckle. Better to let them believe I was fading. Better for what I had in mind. That week I paid them more visits than usual. Dropped by with groceries, stopped to check on the kids, even fixed a leaky faucet in their bathroom. All the while I was watching her. Melanie tried harder each day to mask it, but I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted to me when she thought I wasn't looking. She was waiting for the poison to finish its work. On Wednesday, she offered me tea. "Chamomile," she said, her tone light. "Good for your nerves." I lifted the cup, sniffed it, and smiled. "You first," I said gently, sliding the cup toward her. Her hand froze. For the smallest second, her mask cracked. She recovered, of course, with that sugary laugh of hers. "Oh, I've already had some today. Too much of it makes me sleepy." She pushed the cup back. I didn't drink it. That night I wrote everything down. Every glance, every slip of her hand, every excuse she made. I kept the notes hidden not for the police but for myself. To remember the truth, should anyone ever try to twist it later. By Friday, I noticed something new. She'd stopped trying to convince me directly. Instead, she started whispering to Daniel when she thought I was out of earshot. About my forgetfulness. About how I sometimes seemed confused. Laying the groundwork, painting me as a burden. It wasn't just poison in a glass she was after. It was poison in his mind. That was when I knew this wouldn't end with a single trick at dinner. No, Melanie was patient. She was building a case, weaving a web, making sure when I finally fell, no one would question it. But patience works both ways. And I've lived long enough to know that the best revenge is never rushed. So I began to prepare my own trap, one she wouldn't see coming until it was too late. It was a Saturday evening when she set the trap again. Daniel had called earlier that day, casual as ever, inviting me over for supper. He sounded cheerful, but I could tell it wasn't his idea. It was hers. Whenever he invited me on his own, it was last minute, rushed, clumsy. But when it came from Melanie, it was rehearsed, neat, with just the right amount of sweetness. I arrived at dusk. The house was glowing with warm light, the smell of roasted meat carrying through the open window. The children rushed to me first, as they always did, clinging to my legs, shouting "Grandpa!" loud enough to rattle the walls. Their joy was pure, untouched by whatever storm their mother was brewing. Melanie came from the kitchen, apron tied at the waist, hair tucked perfectly behind her ears. She smiled with all her teeth. "So glad you could make it tonight," she said, but her eyes never matched her mouth. Dinner was served quickly, too quickly for a meal that looked so carefully prepared. Roast chicken, green beans, potatoes, and a small silver saucepan placed directly in front of me. She set it down gently, almost ceremoniously. "This," she said, her voice light, "is a family recipe. A sauce my mother used to make. You'll love it." I studied her as she spoke. Her hands were steady, but her eyes flicked, once to the sauce, then to me. Waiting, measuring. Daniel was busy cutting meat for the children. He didn't notice a thing. I spooned a small bit of the sauce onto my plate, the thick liquid glistening under the dining room light. Melanie leaned forward slightly, anticipation flickering in her eyes. I let the spoon rest. "Smells wonderful," I said evenly. "But you know, I've always been careful with new flavors. Sensitive stomach at my age." She waved her hand, laughing too quickly. "Oh, nonsense. Just try a little. It'll do you good. I lifted the spoon, hesitated, then set it down again. Tell you what, Melanie, why don't you try it first? Make sure I'm not missing out. Her smile faltered, only for a breath, but I saw it. Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. Finally she said, "Oh, I had some in the kitchen already." Couldn't resist. She pushed the saucepan closer to me. I nodded slowly, holding her eyes. I see. For a few moments, the only sound in the room was the clink of Daniel's fork and the chatter of the children. Melanie sat straighter, folding her hands neatly, her mask slipping back into place. But I'd caught it, the hesitation, the fear. I didn't touch the sauce. Instead, I ate the chicken plain, each bite deliberate, never breaking eye contact with her longer than a second. And every time she glanced at my plate, I knew she was keeping count. Counting what I hadn't eaten. Counting how long it might take before I showed signs of weakness. When the plates were cleared, she leaned across the table and asked sweetly, "Everything to your liking?" "Delicious," I said softly. Truly. Her smile returned, but her eyes betrayed her, because she knew I hadn't touched a drop of that sauce. And she knew I'd seen right through her. The week after that second dinner was the longest I'd lived in years. Not because of any illness, not because of aches in my bones, but because I could feel the air shifting around me. Once you've seen betrayal with your own eyes, every shadow grows teeth. On Monday, Daniel called me while on his lunch break. "Dad, thanks again for helping with the faucet. Melanie says you're still handy as ever." He chuckled, but I could tell there was something behind his voice, a hesitation, as though he were repeating words that weren't entirely his own. I told him the truth gently. "Your old man's still got some fight in him yet. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Silence on the line. Then quietly he said, "I know, Dad. I know." That was when I realized she was whispering to him already, seeding doubts, painting me as fragile, confused, slipping. It wasn't just poison she wanted in my food. It was poison in his mind. On Wednesday, I paid them another visit. I made it a point to stop by unannounced, a bag of groceries in my hand, smiling like nothing was wrong. The kids barreled into me, clinging to my legs, their laughter like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For a moment, I nearly forgot the darkness in that house. But then Melanie appeared from the kitchen. Her smile was wide, too wide, and her eyes flicked to the grocery bag in my hand. "Oh, you shouldn't have," she said, her voice sweet as syrup. "You really don't need to be carrying heavy things at your age." I held her gaze. "I'm not that old, Melanie." I placed the bag on the counter and lifted it higher than necessary, showing her I had strength enough for both of us. Her smile thinned. "Of course, I just worry sometimes. You forget things. You leave the stove on. Daniel and I talked about it." She said it so casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. But I saw the calculation in her eyes. I nodded slowly, pretending to take the words in. "Well, it's good to know someone's keeping track of me," I said softly. "Can't be too careful these days." Inside, though, I was boiling. She wasn't just laying traps with cups and glasses anymore. She was building a case, step by step, making me out to be a danger to myself. By Friday, I began writing everything down. Not just the small details. The flick of her wrist, the way she pushed food toward me, the too sweet encouragements to eat more. No, I began keeping record of every word she said in front of me. Every whisper I overheard between her and Daniel, every sideways glance. My notes grew into a ledger of her deceit, a trail she couldn't erase. I kept it hidden where no one would think to look, under the false bottom of my desk drawer. I even began rehearsing what I'd say if the time came. If Daniel stood before me, confused and torn, forced to choose between the woman he married and the father who raised him. But still, I knew words alone might not be enough. Paper could burn. Lies could spread faster than truth. That weekend, I decided, I would let her try again. I would sit at that table, look her in the eye, and drink nothing, eat nothing. I would make her desperate enough to show her true face. because the only way to defeat someone like Melanie was to let her believe she had already won. It was a Sunday afternoon when the air itself seemed restless. The sky had that bruised gray color that comes before a storm, and the wind carried the smell of rain even though the ground was dry. I'd been sitting by my kitchen window most of the day, thinking about her, about the way her eyes lingered too long on my glass, about the faint tremor of her hand when I dared her to drink first. A younger man might have doubted himself, brushed it off as imagination. But not me. At my age, you know when danger is sitting across from you, smiling with perfect teeth. By late afternoon, the phone rang. Daniel's number. His voice cheerful but not quite natural. "Dad, why don't you come by for dinner tonight? The kids keep asking about you." I knew right away whose idea it really was. Melanie. It was always Melanie. But I didn't hesitate. "Of course, son," I said. "I'll be there." I drove over just as the sun was beginning to sink, painting the sky orange and red. A beautiful evening for most men. For me, it felt like walking into a battlefield. When she opened the door, she was already in her apron, hair done up as if for company, though no one else was invited. "Daniel's upstairs with the kids," she said smoothly. "Come in. I've made lemonade." The kitchen smelled faintly of lemons and sugar. A pitcher sat on the counter, beads of condensation sliding slowly down its glass sides. 2 tall glasses waited beside it. Struck me as odd. She never prepared drinks before I arrived. But tonight she was ready. She poured with precision, first into one glass, then into the other. She pushed mine across the table, keeping hers close. I sat down, leaned back, and let my eyes rest on her face. "Hot day," she said, her smile small. "Too hot," I answered, wrapping my hand around the cold glass but not drinking. She raised her own glass but didn't take a sip. She was waiting for me, watching me. I swirled the liquid once, listening to the ice clink against the glass, then set it back down. "You first," I said softly. Her face tightened just a fraction, but enough. "I made it for you," she replied. "And I insist," I countered, pushing it slightly toward her. A toast. To family. For a long moment we just stared at each other. I could hear the tick of the wall clock behind her, each second hammering into the silence. She wrapped her fingers around the glass, knuckles whitening, but she didn't drink. Then Daniel's voice floated down from upstairs, calling for her. The spell broke. She set the glass down a little too quickly and turned away. "I'll get him," she muttered, escaping the kitchen without another word. I sat there, staring at the untouched lemonade, and the air felt heavy with everything unsaid. That night, back home, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk with the notebook open in front of me. Page after page of notes. Dates, times, gestures, words. Everything she thought I'd missed, I had captured. But as I stared at the lines of my own handwriting, I knew it wasn't enough. Paper could be argued with. Words could be twisted. If it came to her word against mine, I wasn't sure Daniel would know who to believe. He loved me, but he lived with her. She had his ear every night. No, what I needed was something undeniable. A truth that could not be buried under excuses. The next day, I drove into town and bought a small camera. Nothing flashy, just a little device a man could slip into his jacket without anyone noticing. I tested it that evening, adjusting the angle, learning the weight of it. By the time I went to bed, I knew I had the tool I needed. And from that moment on, I carried it every time I went to their house. Quiet, patient, waiting. Because I knew, deep in my bones, that she wasn't done. Poisonous people never stop after one strike. No, Melanie would try again. And when she did, when she grew bold enough to make her reckless move, I would be ready to catch her in the act. The camera was a quiet little thing, no bigger than a pocket watch. I tucked it inside my jacket, lens peeking through the slit where the fabric had worn thin. I told no one. Not Daniel, not the neighbors, not even the priest I sometimes spoke to when the nights grew heavy. This was between me and Melanie. A week passed, then another. I waited, patient as I've always been. And then, on a Thursday evening, the call came. "Dad," Daniel said cheerfully, Why don't you come by tomorrow for dinner? The kids miss you. His voice was warm, but I heard the faint note of rehearsed enthusiasm. Not his own. Hers. I agreed, of course. And when I hung up, I sat for a long while in the quiet of my kitchen. The clock ticked steadily on the wall. I ran my fingers over the worn wood of the table, the same one where my wife and I had raised our boy, the same one where we'd planned out our lives. I knew tomorrow wasn't going to be just another dinner. Tomorrow she'd make her final move. The next evening, I arrived with a smile and a basket of fresh rolls. The kids came running, wrapping themselves around my legs, and for a moment my heart softened. But then Melanie appeared in the kitchen doorway, her apron tied neat, her hair perfect, her eyes watching me like a hawk. Dinner was roast again, her specialty. She placed a plate before me, steaming, fragrant. A glass of wine followed, red as blood, poured with slow precision. I didn't touch it right away. I let the conversation flow. Daniel talked about work, the children chattered about school. I laughed, nodded, asked questions. And all the while I saw her watching, waiting. Halfway through the meal, she leaned forward, her voice light, sweet. Why don't you try the sauce, Dad? I made it just for you. Her hand rested too long on the handle of the serving spoon. I knew it with the same certainty a man knows when a storm is about to break. So I reached for the glass of wine. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted it. She leaned in, her eyes wide with anticipation. And that's when I coughed. A dry, hacking cough that shook my shoulders. I set the glass down, fumbling a little, just enough to sell the act. Daniel jumped up, concerned. Melanie stood frozen, eyes locked on mine. I caught the flicker there, the split-second satisfaction she couldn't quite hide. That was when I pressed the button inside my jacket pocket. The camera's tiny light blinked once. I straightened, clearing my throat, and forced a chuckle. Old man lungs, I said. Don't mind me. I didn't drink. Not a drop. After dinner, when the kids were upstairs, I asked Daniel to help me carry something to the car. Just a box I brought for you, I said. He followed me outside, puzzled. When the door shut behind us, I turned to him. My voice was low, steady. Son, I need you to see something. I pulled the small camera from my jacket and handed it over. Play it. His brow furrowed as he pressed the button. And there, in the dim light of the porch, he saw it. The footage of his wife hovering over my plate, over my glass, her hand moving just so, her eyes glancing toward the doorway to be sure she wasn't seen. The color drained from his face. His hand shook as he held the device. Dad, what is this? The truth, I said. My voice felt like gravel in my throat. The truth about the woman you married. He watched the clip again, and again, each time his breathing growing heavier, harsher. Finally, he sank down onto the steps, head in his hands. I put a hand on his shoulder. I didn't want to believe it either, but you needed to see. She wasn't just after me, Daniel. She was after everything. Our family, our legacy, all of it. We sat there in silence for a long while, the crickets singing in the darkness around us. Finally, he whispered, "What do we do?" And that, child, was the question I'd been waiting for. I won't tell you the details of what happened next. Some things are best left in shadow. But I'll say this, the mask came off. The truth stood bare, and there was no going back. Melanie learned that night that poison doesn't just kill the body. It destroys trust, love, family. She lost everything she thought she'd gain. As for me, I went home, sat once more at my old kitchen table, and poured myself a glass of wine. Untouched, untainted. I raised it to the empty chair across from me, where my wife once sat, and whispered, "Justice, love, justice at last." And yet, the glass felt heavy in my hand. Because revenge never tastes sweet, it only tastes necessary. It's strange, child, how a house can look the same and yet feel completely different. The curtains still hung in the windows, the children's toys still littered the floor, the same smell of roast chicken lingered in the air. But after that night, after the truth could no longer be denied, the silence inside their home was heavy as stone. Daniel came to me 3 days later, his face gray with exhaustion, his eyes red from sleepless nights. He didn't tell me everything. He didn't need to. I already knew. He'd confronted her, and the marriage that once looked so solid now stood on sand. Lies do that, they erode foundations grain by grain until the whole structure caves in with a whisper. He sat at my kitchen table, the same one where his mother and I had raised him, and he said only this, "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have seen it sooner." I placed my hand on his. "Son, when you love someone, you don't look for daggers. You look for kindness. That's nothing to be ashamed of. What matters is you see clearly now." The children stayed with me for a few weeks after that. Their laughter filled my empty rooms, brought life back into spaces where loneliness had been my only companion. At night, when I tucked them in, I caught myself whispering the same promise I'd once made to Daniel: "I'll always protect you." As for Melanie, well, people like her rarely vanish completely. They slink into shadows, wait for opportunities, look for cracks where they might slide back in. But she underestimated one thing. Once a man has faced death at his own table and lived, he doesn't forget. He doesn't forgive. I keep the notebook in my desk, and the small camera too, tucked away where no curious hand can find them. Not because I need them anymore, but because reminders matter. They remind me that trust is the most valuable currency a man can hold, and once it's stolen, it can never be spent again. Sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, I sit with a glass of untouched wine, staring at the empty chair across from me. I think about Melanie, about Daniel, about the thin line between family and betrayal. And I wonder, was it always her nature to be poisonous? Or did something in life twist her that way? Then I shake my head. Doesn't matter. Some questions don't deserve answers. The storm has passed, but I know storms always leave scars. And yet here I am, still standing, still breathing, still watching. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: the people closest to you can wound the deepest. But they forget old men don't break easy. We bend, we endure, and sometimes, when pushed far enough, we strike back. And when we do, child, we don't miss.